Please, please don't leave me here alone." The voice came through shattered glass and rain, weak but desperate. Garrett Monroe had been driving home from his second shift, the one at the warehouse that paid for his daughter's asthma medication, when he saw the sedan wrapped around the oak tree, smoke rising from the crumpled hood. He didn't think, he just stopped. Inside, a woman hung sideways against her seatbelt, her designer suit torn, her face pale. She looked up at him with unfocused eyes and whispered again, "Don't leave me." "I'm not going anywhere," Garrett said, his hands already working to pry open the door. "I promise, you're not alone." Behind him, in his truck, his 4-year-old daughter Ivy slept in her car seat, oblivious. The woman's name was Elliot Bancroft. He learned that later, at the hospital, when the nurses asked who'd brought her in. What he didn't learn until much later was that she was the CEO of Bancroft Industries, worth $40 million, and that she'd been driving away from her father's funeral when grief blurred her vision and the road disappeared. All Garrett knew that night was that another human being needed help, and he'd been taught long ago that you don't turn away from that. His late wife, Mara, had believed that. She'd been a hospice nurse, the kind who held patients' hands through their final breaths and never flinched. When she was diagnosed with an aggressive form of lupus 3 years ago, she'd faced it the same way, with quiet grace and stubborn kindness. She'd lasted 18 months, long enough to make Garrett promise he'd teach Ivy to see people, not circumstances, to give even when you had nothing left. He'd been trying, God, he'd been trying. 2 jobs, a 1-bedroom apartment where Ivy slept in the bedroom and he took the couch. Meals stretched thin, medical bills stacked high. But Ivy smiled every morning, and that was enough. That had to be enough. 3 days after the accident, Elliot found him. She appeared at the warehouse during his lunch break, still moving carefully, a fading bruise on her temple. Her assistant had tracked down his truck's license plate. She'd come to say thank you. "You saved my life," she said simply, standing in the fluorescent glare of the loading dock. Garrett shrugged, uncomfortable. Anyone would have. "No," her voice was firm. "They wouldn't have. 4 cars passed before you stopped. I counted." She paused, and something in her expression cracked. "I was ready to give up. I'd just buried my father. My business partner had stolen half our clients. I had no family left. I was so tired of fighting alone. And then you appeared. You told me I wasn't alone." Garrett shifted his weight, feeling the ache in his back from lifting boxes. "You needed help. That's all that mattered." "That's exactly what my father used to say." Elliot's eyes glistened. "He built his company from nothing, taught me that integrity was the only currency that mattered. Then he died, and I found out my partner, someone I trusted, had been embezzling for years. The board wanted me to step down, said I was too emotional, too young, too damaged." She took a breath. "I was driving to my lawyer's office to sign away everything my father built, but I couldn't see the road. I couldn't see anything but failure." "And now?" Garrett asked quietly. "Now, I'm standing here, talking to a man who has every reason to be bitter. I looked you up, Garrett. I know about your wife, the medical debt, the 2 jobs, yet you still stopped for a stranger." She looked at him with something like wonder. "How do you do that? How do you still have faith in people?" He thought of Mara, her hand in his during those final days. Her whisper, "Teach Ivy that kindness is never wasted, even when it hurts." He said finally, "Because someone taught me, and because my daughter's watching. I want her to grow up knowing that your worst day doesn't define you. How you show up for others does." Elliot was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to help you. Not as charity, as repayment. Please, let me pay off your medical bills, set up a fund for Ivy. You gave me my life back. Let me give you some breathing room." Garrett stiffened. "I didn't do it for money." "I know." Her voice softened. That's exactly why I'm offering. You're drowning, Garrett. I can see it. And you're too proud to ask for help. But what if this isn't about you? What if it's about Ivy? What if accepting help is the bravest thing you could do? His throat tightened. He thought of Ivy's inhaler, the generic brand that didn't work as well. The school field trip he'd miss because he couldn't afford the fee. The birthday party next month where there'd be no cake, just a cupcake with a single candle. I don't know how to accept something like that, he admitted, his voice rough. Start with Kofi, Elliot said, a tentative smile breaking through. And maybe you could tell me how you keep going. Because I'm standing, but I don't know if I remember how to move forward. And you seem like someone who's figured that out. Over the next 3 months, coffee became dinner. Dinner became long walks where they talked about loss and hope and the terrifying act of starting over. Elliot met Ivy, who asked her with 4-year-old directness why she looked so sad. Elliot knelt down and said, "Because I forgot what it feels like to have a family, but maybe I'm remembering." Ivy took her hand. "You can share ours. Daddy says families aren't just blood, they're people who stay." Elliot looked up at Garrett, tears streaming. "Is that offer real?" "It's real," Garrett said, his own eyes wet. Slowly, things shifted. Elliot paid off the medical debt quietly through an anonymous donor fund. She offered Garrett a job at her company, warehouse management, fair pay, benefits. Not a handout, she insisted, a partnership. She needed someone who understood hard work and integrity, someone who wouldn't steal from her. Garrett accepted, not because the money fixed everything, but because he saw in Elliot what Mara had seen in everyone, someone worth believing in, someone worth showing up for. And Elliot, for the first time since her father died, stopped feeling alone. They never married, never even dated, but they became something deeper. Two broken people who chose to rebuild side by side, who learned that love isn't always romantic. Sometimes it's just showing up. Sometimes it's being the voice that says, "You're not alone." On the anniversary of the accident, Elliot and Garrett stood at the oak tree, Ivy between them holding both their hands. "Thank you," whispered, "for not driving past." "Thank you," replied, "for reminding me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's trust." Ivy looked up at them both, wise beyond her years. "Mama would be happy you found each other. She always said angels come when you need them most." And maybe she was right. Maybe that's what kindness is. Ordinary people becoming angels in someone's darkest moment. Not with wings or halos, but with steady hands and the simple, radical act of staying. Because in the end, we're all just looking for someone to tell us we're not alone. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to stop and help, we discover we never were.